Bill Camp, you play Robert Chesney on the Hulu miniseries Looming Tower about the intelligence failure, I guess you could say, in the lead up to 9/11. And your character was a composite character, correct?
Correct. Yeah, he was. Bob was based on what I was working with was uh, four guys, three and a half guys that actually exist, and he was he was a composite. He was sort of a stew of those three and a half fellows.
Do you know who those people were?
I do, yes. Mark Rossini, Dan Coleman, John Antisev, and his brother, Mike Antisev. And they were all FBI agents. So they were connected and very resourceful and knowledgeable about 846. And they appear throughout Lawrence's book. And then I had the opportunity to sit down with all but one of them. And they were a huge resource for me in terms of understanding what each of them went through, certain events that do happen in the course of the show, and nothing for an actor as a kind of character gift than to speak with somebody who actually was present at an event that's being depicted, in the story of the Looming Tower, at least. So they were incredibly valuable to me. But like you pointed out, Charlie, it was a composite guy. So I did have the liberty of having a larger landscape in some ways. At least for me, that was how I approached it. Because I had these three guys I actually got to speak with and get direct information from, and they could share with me what they felt. And in some cases, I even got some pieces of writing from a couple of them, which was really valuable in terms of their sort of emotional experience with certain things. And then the one guy that I didn't get to speak with was Dan Coleman, who I didn't get to speak with, who's pretty prominent in Larry's book. But it was a great source for me to be able to then combine all of these different things instead of having to focus on trying to depict one character. And that's what makes, I think, Bob Chesney's character so rich, is that he is a composite. At least, for me, there was great liberty there.
And
somebody.
Well, you're talking about the some of the advantages of playing a composite character of several real life people as opposed to just one person. I'm wondering, what were the challenges that playing a composite character presented to you?
Well, I think because inherently you're not playing just one person, and yet you are playing, or I was trying to depict little pieces of these four existing real true life people. I wanted to honor them in terms of what I understood them or what I knew their experience was. And yet, I also knew that they were not fully that person. So it was kind of a sort of a conflict, if I'm articulating this. I knew that there was a real essence of, let's say, Dan Coleman in one sequence, that I could tap into and use as a handle, and yet there was also a very real experience of John Anisev's. And so I was constantly thinking, oh, well, you know, I want to honor, I'm sort of grappling between these two, sometimes three different people. So I guess that would be a challenge, but I think less of, I don't think so much of it as a challenge, you know, because ultimately, maybe in the beginning stages, you know, when I'm really finding or was finding who Bob Chesney was, it was a real challenge. But ultimately, it's like I said, it's very liberating, and that challenge was diminished, and it became you know, exhilarating to sort of step in 4 pairs of shoes at different times.
So
Ultimately, coalescing and distilling into this one guy, Bob Chesney, who I think is who we see eventually at the end.
And one of the interesting things about this whole thing is how everyone's relationship is with John ONeill, because he's a very he can be a very abrasive person, but it's interesting how the warmest relationship that he has, it isn't even with his family or any of his mistresses. It's with Agent Sufan and your character. And did all of the people that you were playing, did they all have a similar relationship with John ONeill, or was that more, or did it very much vary from person to person on that?
I think it varied. I know it varied. It wasn't, you know, consistently throughout. I think that the relationship that we see in our series is the relationship which was maybe more the kind of relationship one of those gentlemen had with John ONeill, which was, you know, he's at one point, the character is described, Bob Chesney, as a kind of grumpy Santa. And and that was a great, you know, handle. As funny as that may seem, it was hugely, you know, valuable to me. And I think that was kind of, there was a great, you know, respect and frustration in the relationship with Bob Chesney and John ONeill. And I won't necessarily say who of the real guys that, you know, that relationship was more accurate or more truthful to, because I'm not positive about it. It's a guess. But that was really the, you know, the joy in working with Jeff and having that kind of, you know, sort of, what would you call it, like junior high sort of relationship in a way. You know, it's like, I think the way that John ONeill conducted himself was sort of abrasive to Bob Chesney, in the way that he didn't see that's how things, you know, as to many, I think, that came in contact with him. But at the same time, I know that, you know, at least Bob Chesney really, really admired and respected, and there was a you know, a love there for the man, because he you know, I think he really admired what he was doing, John ONeill, you know, and they were on the same team. And I think that's a really important thing, is that even though they may argue and such, they were in an honest relationship. They were being truthful with each other when they communicated, whether it was they were giving each other, you know, jabs and put downs, or teasing each other, or trying to undermine the kind of each other's egos or what have you. Nonetheless, they were communicating in an honest, truthful way, and they were on the same team. And as we both know, having seen it and the results, that's, you know, we're still playing out as a country and as a world. Lack of communication can be so destructive, you know, on a personal level with oneself, or with one's partner or with one's family or friends or what have you. But then on the level of government, communicating with each other, who we sort of take for granted are going to do that, especially, obviously wrongly so, but one would hope that they would, and they didn't. And that's that's danger Will Robinson time, and obviously we saw what happens when that goes on. And
yeah, it's interesting how like their teamwork came together as a result of who they were up against, which was the CIA. And, even though they should have been working together, and we like to think that our government institutions are above petty bickering and petty office politics, but they're not.
No, I mean, it's whenever we involve the content. That's what's I think really great about the series itself, is that it depicts the massive egos, the huge egos that get in the way, and obviously the hubris that went down at that time amongst those players. But how, and I think it's so great in those scenes, right? When Peter and Jeff and Michael and all those folks sitting around that table, and Alec and and Rand even participates in all of it. But when it becomes a sort of a joust of egos, this competition every time, then you see, oh no, that can be nothing but corrosive and have a really bad end, and it did.
And so I'm wondering, there were a lot of scenes that you were filming that are actually based on real life things, some things that are etched into our public consciousness that I always think of in that final episode, that shot of you after the towers have collapsed and you're just covered in ash and you're just walking over to Elizabeth, right? Her house to ask about John. Challenging scene to film that you were a part of, whether it was that or like the recreation of the embassies in Kenya. Which was the most challenging?
Oh, geez. Wow. All of what you just named, but that was super. I mean, just thinking about it right now, because Annie is so remarkable. There was a lot going on in order to be present in that scene. Episode 10, when he goes to Elizabeth's house. And I had spoken to some people because I was living here, but I was actually working in California at the time on 9/11. That was an emotionally very difficult sequence. Just because of the fact that I had spoken with a lot of people and had been through it and had been very close to the event, and are still, coping with that and the results of it. And so there's a delicacy and a truthfulness, and one wants to honor that and not do something that's indicating or indicative. So I was thinking of experiences that friends of mine had, and then working with Anne, and just the basic, the situation itself was a devastating situation, and delicate, and kind of, well, how does one live through that? And then also the scene, I think, with Yusuf Lorraine, the master actor, Yusuf, in when we were in Johannesburg. I think we shot it. I think we were closer to Pretoria that day, but in an old school. And that was because the scene is so long, and the scene is also very. I really wanted to also, because I had spoken with John ONeill, who was in the room with the guy and actually was the guy who did what one sees Bob Chesney do. So I got to speak to that guy and go through that whole time and what he remembers and what was it like, you know, the air in the room and the way they, you know, and also that there's a definite strategy happening there, and it's a really beautifully written scene. Bash wrote a great scene, and John Dahl was there and guiding me, and Yusuf, and you know, the whole crew. It was very hot, but it's a long sequence, and yet it was. Those are always, you know, those are also really exciting and kind of ecstatic experiences too, because they're very long and they're taxing and they're you know, delicate emotionally, especially when they move in and out. And I wanted to make sure that people saw Bob Chesney's experience in that scene too, because the man had a lot of years, which, you know, go back to those gentlemen I was talking to before, who had real experience in domestic crime here in the States before they started working in, you know, with 846 and such. And so there were years and years of experience of interrogation, and also make sure that it ended on the right note too, you know, because he has to get that number. And he's also in a massive amount of pain at that time, Bob Chesney, you know, and not make sure and not play that card. You know what I mean, Charlie? So it's not indicate that too much. So that was probably the most complicated, sort of the most subtly kinetic scene. And there were such huge stakes. And then of course, you know, that last scene is just it's a flatlining scene. That doesn't mean, but I don't mean it in a kind of like flatline dead scene. It's that the emotion is so high, and the devastation and the sort of environmental and kind of sonic and sensorial and emotional and world shift has happened, especially for Bob, who was right there. That it's almost like, you know, I guess people would call it shock, but I like to think of it as a flat line where it's so high and so intense that it's almost like there's nothing to do, you know.
So we're almost out of time, but I do just want to ask a much lighter question to end this on. So, you know, you've been acting for years in, you know, theater, television, and film. And last year, you got nominated for an Emmy for the night of the supporting actor category. You know, after all these years, even for a period, you know, leaving the profession for a little while, what was it like to, you know, go to the Emmys as a nominee and to be a part of that? What was that like for you?
It was the best. It was wicked, man. It was like, you know, it was so much fun. It was so great, and I was able to really experience it and really be present with it. And I had my wife with me, and our son came out with us, and we made a deal of going out there and seeing friends in Los Angeles, and the whole event was, you know, it was just so exciting, and I was so grateful. You know, it was really, really, really wonderful. Nothing that I ever expected at all, and it was kind of like it was, you know, what a long, strange trip. It was, but it's still going, you know. And that was just a great gift, a great event that happened along the way. And it was a really fun, it was a great honor, obviously, because it was an acknowledgement of the unbelievably talented and smart people, artists that I've been able to, fortunate enough to work with over the years, over those many years you were talking about. And even the people when I stopped that were, teachers of mine. And that's sort of like it's kind of like, oh, it sounds corny, but it's really because of them that I found myself there. It had nothing, but had something to do with me, but a lot of help, a lot of help. And so, and so it was just great. It was a great celebration, of all of those kinds of things. And when one has an opportunity to celebrate that, because it's not just me, it's years of people and all these people that have guided me and given me lessons and taught me stuff, mainly through failure. And so I'm eager to keep learning. So maybe so I can go out there. And also it's I got to see a lot of friends of mine because, as you rightfully said, it's been a while. And so I got to see a lot of people that were out there too, which is really cool,
Well, Bill, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Looming Tower is on Hulu. You can see all the episodes, and we wish the best for you this Emmy season.
Thanks so much, Charlie. It was a great pleasure talking to you.